Bruno Le Maire has been France's finance minister since 2017. It is a tough brief. After being hit hard by the first wave, the French economy now looks set to have a punishing Q4 and Q1. The PMI data for November, released this morning, show a severe deceleration in services and a dark outlook for manufacturing. That said, the case count is starting to stabilize. And this weekend's Sunday papers suggest the current COVID restrictions in France will start to ease in 3 stages from December the 1st, with the president, I understand, providing further details at 8 p.m. Paris time tomorrow. However, restaurants, bars, and other parts of the service sector are likely to face ongoing restrictions. There are also challenges at the European level, with Hungary and Poland recently shaking the EU to its foundations by vetoing the bloc's upcoming 7-year budget and its attached pandemic package, the two being worth a combined circa 1.8 trillion euros. Both Warsaw and Budapest objecting to a conditionality clause that ties funding to adherence to democratic standards. As I say, it is a tough brief, as I'm sure our guest this morning is only too well aware. Welcome, Bruno Le Maire, Minister.
Good morning. Good to see you and good to hear you. I think that you have drawn a very clear picture of the current situation. We are facing, I think, the biggest economic crisis we ever lived since World War II. We have tried to fix the issues and to reduce the impact on the French economy by taking some very strong measures to support the sectors that have been the most severely hit by the crisis. And on the same time, we have launched, and I think we are the first country within the Eurozone that has launched a huge recovery plan of 100 billion euros for the sake of having, after the crisis, a French economy that should be greener and more competitive than the one we had before the crisis. We are now at the time where President Macron should announce changes in the COVID restrictions for the sake of having possibilities for the shops to reopen and having the possibility of accelerating the relaunch of the French economy. And I would like also to insist on the last point that you raised, which is the necessity of having a common European approach. We have adopted the European Recovery Plan. That's very good news for all of us. But now we need to implement that recovery plan, and the sooner, the better.
Had PMI data out this morning from the French economy. I'd like to get your reaction to it. The November services number in particular is one that stands out, dropping to 38 from 46.5, a very sharp deceleration in the month of November. You've recently downgraded your economic forecasts. Do you think the risk, given this kind of data, now lies to the downside for those forecasts even further?
I don't think so. I think that we are all aware of the current situation. We have decided a lockdown for the month of November for the sake of improving the health situation in France. And I think it was the right decision because we have been able, with President Macron and Prime Minister Jean Castex, to decelerate the situation as far as the virus is concerned. And that's good news for all of us. Of course, those decisions have a very important impact on some parts of the French economy. I mean, especially the services. And we have to be all aware that the services, I mean, especially restaurants, hotels, bars, and some of the activities linked to the services sector have been really very much hit by this situation and by the crisis. That's why we're thinking of some more support to those sectors for helping them to go through this very difficult period. But if you are looking at other parts of the French economy, they are doing well. And I think that we should be all aware of that very constructed situation where you have some sectors really severely hit by the crisis. I mean the services, hotel, restaurants, and others that are doing well. At the end, the global situation of the French economy should be a recession of 11% in 2020. That's the figure we put on the table at the French Parliament. But we are also waiting for a very strong recovery in 2021 with a level of growth around 6%. And I hope that we will be able, that's really my total determination, that we will be able to have the same kind of economic development by the end of 2022 as the one we had before the crisis in 2019. So once again, I'm expecting a strong recession in 2020, let's say 11%, but I'm also building with all the economic forces in France a strong recovery with a level of growth of around 6% in 2021.
So just to kind of, there's a lot to unpack in there. So let's just take it bit by bit. Let's deal with the economic forecast first of all. In terms of the recovery, you are still seeing a reasonably strong bounce back from the relatively low levels that we find ourselves at the moment. Do you not worry that we are moving from a short but severe shock to a longer, more painful slump that is going to be harder to get out of?
No, because I've never explained that it would be a short-term shock. I've never believed that it would be an economic shock for, let's say, some weeks or some months. I've been explaining from the very beginning of the crisis, I would say since March 2020, that it would be a long-lasting crisis. And I made that very clear to the French people, that we would have to wait till the end of 2022, which means more than 2 years, before having the same level of growth as the one we had before the crisis. So I think that I've always stick to this truth and to this reality. It is a long-standing crisis, and we will have to wait till 2021 before having a better level of growth, until the end of 2022, before having the same kind of economic development as the one we had before the crisis. We have to live with the virus. We are all waiting for a vaccine, but let's be clear, we will have to live with the vaccine over the next weeks and maybe over the next month. And we have all to be aware of that. And we need to speak very frankly to the people, explaining the situation as it is, not trying to sell some dreams that could be nightmares in a few months. The truth is that we still have to live with the virus over the next month. We have to adapt our personal behaviors to live with the virus. And the challenge that we all have to face, I mean the UK, France, all the European countries, is to have this economic recovery, which is absolutely vital for all of us, while living with the virus.
You mentioned a moment ago the small business sector and the damage that is being done there. Is there anything more you can do with the France Reliance funds that you mentioned in terms of helping those small businesses out? You talked about more options. You talked about being more creative in terms of helping that sector out. What else can you do? And do you think enhanced furlough schemes will be part of that mix?
I think that some sectors will have to remain closed over the next weeks and maybe over the next month. I'm talking about restaurants, for instance, or bars. We all know that tourism has been really severely hit, and all tourism activities have been really severely hit by the crisis and by the current situation. We have to do more for these sectors. We have, for instance, the Solidarity Fund. This Solidarity Fund has been implemented from the very beginning for the SMEs and for the independent activities. It proved to be very efficient, but the current level of the Solidarity Fund will not be enough for the restaurants, the bars, and the hotels that will have to remain closed. So we are thinking about a better protection that could be given by this Solidarity Fund. We are working on that with the Prime Minister and with the French President, and I hope that before the end of this week, I will be able to announce some new measures to help those restaurants, those bars, all the sectors that are linked to the tourist activities to live with the virus and to face that dramatic situation.
Okay, we'll look forward to that announcement later on this week. It's going to be a busy week in terms of details coming from the French government. We're looking forward to hearing from the President tomorrow. Minister, let me get into some of the questions that we're getting in on the Q&A box because they're extremely useful and I think are worth asking. Let's talk a little bit about that 6% that you've got penciled in for 2021. Donald wants to know, now that we have positive vaccine data, how is that going to help? Realistically, we're not going to see this vaccine being effective for probably another year. So what are the primary factors that will get you to 6% in 2021?
I'm not a specialist of health issues. I'm not a specialist of vaccine. And I will share your point of view. We have to remain realistic. It will take months before those vaccines will be efficient and will definitively protect us from the consequences of the virus. So let's remain realistic. And it has been my point of view from the very beginning of this crisis to tell the truth to the French people and to remain realistic. But if you are looking at the situation in 2020, when President Macron decided to lift the lockdown after the lockdown of March and April, the reaction of the French economy was a very strong and very positive one. And when you are looking at the figures of the third part of year 2020 in the French economy, the result is quite striking. We have a growth for the third part of 2020 of more than 18%, which means that as soon as the lockdown measures are lifted, you have a very strong and very positive reaction of the French economy for one single reason, which is that the basis of the French economy is sound. And I strongly believe that if we are able to face the virus, if we are able to protect, and that's exactly what we are doing, the measures that will protect some key sectors that are hit by the crisis, and if that's the third condition, we are able to invest on some new sectors and to fund the disruptive technologies that will help us to overcome the crisis and to be more competitive at the end of the crisis. In that case, after the crisis, we could have a French economy that would be stronger than before the crisis.
In the meantime, though, the debt levels are starting to increase and increase quite rapidly as you provide assistance for the economy. This is a theme that is running through the questions I can see on the screen in front of me. A number of questions coming in on debt levels. Do you view the overall level of public debt in France as an important matter, as the Cour des Comptes do at the moment? Do you believe it's time to start looking at tackling this debt? Is it too early to start tackling this debt with tax increases?
I think it's really too early, but I still consider that this is a very serious matter. And we have to take that into account. The fact that there is a high level of public debt in France, over 120%, is a serious matter. And we will have to deal at the right time with that concern and with that issue. I really think that it would be totally irresponsible to say, well, I do not care about the French debt. I do not care about the public debt. No, I care about the public debt in France. And I know that at a due time, we will have to have the right responses to this high level of public debt. But the strategic choice that we made with President Macron was to protect our salaries and to protect our private companies. And I strongly believe that this strategic choice that we have made, and when I say we, that's all the European countries, at the beginning of the crisis in March 2020, was the right choice and the single responsible choice for our economies, because it helps us to have a quick economic recovery when the virus is over. So I really think that this choice was the right one. We have preserved and protected our salaries and our SMEs. It was the right economic choice. When the virus will be over and when the economic crisis will be over, then it will be time to deal with that key question of the public debt. I think that we can give three type of responses to the high level of public debt in France. The first one, of course, is growth. If we want to reduce the level of public debt, we need more growth. And that's why I decided to launch the recovery plan, the French recovery plan, as soon as possible, because the French recovery plan is a key condition to have a huge and important level of growth starting in 2021. That's the first response to the public debt. The second one is controlled public finances. We need to remain very responsible as far as public finances are concerned. We do not have to mix investments and current public expenses. When we are making public debt, it is only to fund investments, new technologies, improvement of the French competitiveness. That's not for the current public expenses. And the third response is, of course, structural reforms. If we want to get rid of this high level of public debt, we need growth. We need to be responsible as far as the public finances are concerned, but we also need structural reforms. And I strongly believe that one of the key structural reforms for France remains the pension reforms.
Can I just take another view on this? Interest rates are incredibly low, Minister. Why worry about reducing debt when interest rates are as cheap as they are? Is it not a priority for significantly further down the road reducing debt, given the fact that OAT yields are where they are?
If you can guarantee me that the interest rates will remain as low as they are now over, let's say, the next decade, that's fine. But I think it would not be responsible to take for granted that the interest rates will remain at the same level over the next decade. You know the sentence by Shakespeare: if you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me. If you can say to me, well, the interest rates will never grow, then that's fine. I can have a very high level of public debt for the next 5 decades. But since I do not have any guarantee for the long term, I think that's the responsible approach that we have with President Macron and Prime Minister Jean Castex is now to invest to protect our economy and to have a quick economic recovery. And then in a second step, think about the best ways of reducing the level of French public debt.
Minister, are you suggesting that French debt is unsustainable without, at current levels, without these super low interest rates?
I'm not suggesting that there is any difficulty on the French debt for one single reason, which is that we have a very clear strategy, growth, and then dealing with this high level of public debt. And for a second reason, that we are member of the Eurozone, and the decisions taken by Christine Lagarde and taken by the ECB are a very strong protection. And that's also a message I would like to send to everybody, to the French people, but to the European people. The ECB is a very strong protection because thanks to the ECB and thanks to the monetary policy that is implemented by Christine Lagarde, we have the possibility of raising debt at a very low level of interest rates. So that's a chance, that's an opportunity, and if we can go out of the crisis in the coming years, it will be thanks to the efforts made by each nation, but also thanks to the support of the ECB and of the monetary policy decided by Christine Lagarde.
Do you think there are other nations in Europe who may have debt sustainability issues? Italy is a country that instantly springs to mind. Italy is certainly benefiting from the largesse that is being provided by Christine Lagarde at the moment with her very low interest rates. If growth is not possible, if growth is not at a sufficient level, do you worry that sustainability of debt will become a problem again in other parts of the Eurozone?
It could be an issue if we did not have this monetary policy and if we did not have the possibility of having a better level of growth over the next years. But I'm really confident that we will be able all together to overcome this crisis. And I'm really confident that there will not be any problem of debt sustainability within the Eurozone. First of all, once again, because we have the protection of the ECB and the very wise decisions taken by Christine Lagarde and taken by the board of the ECB. Second, because we have adopted a coordinated approach. That's the first time in the European history that we have decided to launch all together national recovery plans, but also we have decided to have a European recovery plan of 750 billion euros. That's the first time in European history that we have been able to get an agreement and a common approach on a European recovery plan. And the third reason is that for the first time in the European history, thanks to the impetus given by Angela Merkel and by Emmanuel Macron, we have decided to raise common debt together, which means that there is a solidarity between Spain, France, Germany, Italy that will protect us from the bad consequences of the economic crisis. So for those three reasons, I do not see any problem of debt sustainability over the next decade within the Eurozone.
Okay, there's a number of different questions. I'm trying to write them down quite fast at the moment. You said that we do not have a sustainability problem within the Eurozone because of the ECB, and you listed 3 points, but the first two are the ECB and the Pan-European Fund. If the ECB wasn't there, are you suggesting that debt would not be sustainable?
I'm just explaining that the fact is alone, things are far more difficult. And if the members of the Eurozone would be alone without the support of this common currency and without the support of the ECB, I really think that the situation would be worse for many countries. So that's why the European construction is so helpful for all of us.
Okay, let's move on to the second part, which is the pan-European budget, the 7-year budget, and the rescue fund that is attached to that. At the moment, Hungary and Poland are vetoing that. Do you have a plan B? And if so, what is it?
We do not have a plan B, but to convince Poland and Hungary to change their mind about this recovery plan. I think they are making a strong political mistake. And I also think that they are making for their own people and for their own nation a strong economic mistake. We all need the support of the European Recovery Plan, and the sooner the better. We are all seeing the consequences of the crisis on our SMEs, on the independent people, on the global growth of the economy. Why should we wait before spending that European money to support our economies. So once again, I really urge Hungary, Poland to change their mind about this recovery plan, because the sooner we are able to implement this recovery plan, the European one, the sooner we can get the money, the better for all of us. That's a question which is of common interest. We need the European support. We need the European recovery plan.
Jean asked the questions. Do you think it's maybe there is some merit in the idea of moving towards enhanced cooperation in order to overcome the vetoes?
No, I think that we are all on the same boat. We must stand together facing this economic crisis, and we are all severely hit by the economic crisis, even Hungary and Poland, which means that we all need the support of the European recovery plan.
Minister, let's talk a little bit about the digital tax. Progress at the OECD level seems to be a little limited at this point. At what point are you going to make a decision on your next move on the digital tax? And have you had any contact with the new Biden administration to discuss it?
I will have a contact with the new Biden administration today to discuss many topics. I mean, first of all, of course, the global economic situation and the global economic forecast. I will have a discussion about the best way of reducing inequalities on our economic models. And of course, I will put on the table the question of trade and the question of digital taxation. As you know, France has decided to have its own digital taxation because it proved to be impossible to get a consensus among the 27 members of the EU. We will levy this digital taxation mid-December, as we always explained to the US administration. But our goal remains to have an OECD agreement by the first month of 2021, because we remain deeply convinced that the best situation and the best way of dealing with this key question of digital taxation is to get a global multilateral agreement within the framework of the OECD. So we will not spare our efforts to convince the new Biden's administration to join the consensus, which is currently the case within the OECD, to join the consensus on a global digital taxation. When you are looking at the current situation, things have changed. You have some of the digital giants explaining that they are in favor of this digital taxation. For instance, Facebook is explaining now that the best solution for them is not to have many national digital taxations, but one single international taxation. So let's build on this willingness of some of the digital giants to move on. Then you have, second point, many nations that have adopted their own national digital taxation. I mean, for instance, the UK, Spain, Italy, Austria have accepted to launch their own digital taxation because we are all aware that this is a question of fairness. You cannot have the digital giants paying less taxes than SMEs and than the smallest private companies in Europe. So the third point is this new Biden's administration. I really hope that this new Biden's administration will mean a new start in the relationship between Europe and the United States. And one possibility of marking this new start would be to get a consensus at the OECD level by the beginning of 2021.
Minister, final quick question from me. I spend a lot of my time talking to airline CEOs, including Ben Smith over at Air France KLM. Can you guarantee the survival in its current form of Air France KLM? There is significant tension within that group, and it looks like it's going to need additional funding.
I can guarantee the survival of Air France. We have decided from the very beginning to support Air France, and we will continue to do so, because, of course, the airline activities is really under huge pressure due to the economic situation. And I really hope that we can keep this alliance between Air France and KLM, which is clearly in the interest of both the Netherlands and France.
Minister, you are an extremely busy man. We really appreciate the time that you have afforded us this morning. Thank you very much indeed for spending time with us here on Bloomberg and our policy forum. Minister, thank you very much indeed. And I urge everybody to continue to tune in to our policy events. You can find out more details of these events. Let me just read this out. www.bloomberg.com/Brussels is where you'll find the details of that. I thought that was an extremely interesting discussion with Bruno Le Maire. We thank him for his time this morning, and thank you as well for joining us. This is Bloomberg.